There we are. Okay, nice. Cool. So, hi everyone. I'm Sarab Sethi. As Dina mentioned, I'm a lecturer at Imperial College London, where I lead the ecosystem sensing research group. I am going to talk to you today about my research on autonomous acoustic monitoring and biodiversity. So this is both my research before, but also kind of themes that my group are interested in, and some future looking towards what are the exciting areas that the field are going. So I guess I don't normally talk to a BioacousTalk titled audience, but why? Just a quick brief, why do we care about this? Why do we do bioacoustics? Biodiversity is really important. These are just a few of the UN Sustainable Development Goals where biodiversity is quite core to sort of food security, climate action, conservation. But actually, biodiversity has been shown to be key to really every single one of the UN SDGs, and there's publications sort of exploring how that links. So to achieve a sustainable future, we need data-driven decision-making. This is both at the policy level. So this is for, I saw all the different countries. I didn't see anyone from the UK, but this is the UK's House of the Parliament. This is where our decision-makers at the governmental level sit. But also, agricultural sites. Say you own a farm and there's a little patch of forest at the edge. How do you decide how to manage that farm to preserve biodiversity, to encourage pollination on your farms, et cetera, et cetera? We need data. Acoustics, very taxonomically broad. You can get lots of information from lots of different animals, just a few shown here, but also it's information dense. You can get behavioral data, you can get phenology, not just occurrence, and actually increasingly you can get abundance as well with new methods. So traditional biodiversity monitoring, I'm sure many of you here are aware with sort of ecology or conservation backgrounds, it's very hands-on. You might not need 10 people with binoculars, but you certainly need at least one or two. And so it's labor intensive, and typical studies kind of show data on the scale of 1 to tens of sites or hours to days of observations. Currently, we're at what I'd call semi-autonomous monitoring. So this is where sensors and analyses are both kind of automatable, but not quite. So this camera trap is a good example of something where you need to go and replace the SD card, replace batteries. So it is passive in that it collects data when the operator's not there, but it's not really fully autonomous. You can't scale it up arbitrarily. And you can get data from tens to hundreds of sites for weeks to months of observations. What our group is really concerned with is bridging this gap and moving over to what I would say is ideal kind of biodiversity monitoring, where we have fully autonomous data collection as well as fully autonomous data analysis that is generalizable, reliable, and gives us large data sets on the scales of hundreds of thousands of sites and years to decades of monitoring. So the talk today will be split into kind of two sections. To start with, I'm going to talk about data collection, so sensors, servers, networks, sort of some innovations we've done there and future areas of the field. And then I'll move on to soundscapes and sort of more analytical work with machine learning models and how they can be used to detect habitat suitability as well as generalizability of those methods. So the first question is, okay, how do we record audio scalably from real ecosystems over long durations? In 2018, we published a paper where we showed that just a simple Raspberry Pi connected to a microphone, but also to a camera or thermometer, a temperature sensor, powered renewably from a solar panel and connected to a 3G network back then through a dongle could deliver robust real-time data. We then kind of took those designs, which were quite put together things in a garden box, and we made a sort of more sleek version of the same thing. And it's not just purely for marketing purposes, but actually, obviously scalability of building of these devices and also reliability of them when they're deployed matters enormously depending on the manufacturing method. So that's where Bug came from. You can read a bit more about it at our website, bug.xyz, but we developed injection molded enclosures, custom PCBs, but the technology is fundamentally what was presented in that Methods in Ecology and Evolution paper, just refined to an industrial kind of standard. So a look inside the Bug hardware, just briefly, looks a bit like this. So for people who are interested, it's a Raspberry Pi compute module which you can see there on the right-hand side, plugged into a few custom PCBs. And there's a LTE modem for connectivity over a SIM card, so mobile network, power circuitry, and sort of all the sort of classic things you see in terms of a sensing device. Our designs for Bug, both 3D CAD for the enclosure and the ECAD for the PCBs, are all fully open source and available on GitHub. So if you are a technology developer or you're interested in seeing how these kind of sensors work under the hood, then I'd encourage you to check out that resource. And I should say, actually, very soon we have documentation coming out that gets into a lot more sort of user guide type of level information on how the Bug can be used. And yeah, just stay tuned for that. So, okay, so we got devices that we can then deploy, transmitting real-time audio data or near real-time audio data from many sites. How do we organize, analyze, and store this? So this is just one solution we built, the kind of prototype, and we made a Bug web app. So I'm going to try and do a live demo, and it might crash and burn, but hopefully it doesn't. Here, what you see is our web app that we built for the Bug system. So you can see this is a deployment in Taiwan, where about 10 or so devices are currently uploading in real time from the field. They're on an array of coffee farms and forests nearby the coffee farms, and some have been deinstalled and most are still going. We see on this stream page that data is coming in. You know, there's a 7 or 8 minute delay from when the data is recorded to when it comes in. And then you can see the data arrive. You can see the analyses on the right-hand side, BirdNet Lite and the newer BirdNet analysis through BirdNet Live being run. And we can get detections out. And so we've built this whole sort of infrastructure, this Google Cloud Services-based web app where audio is coming in the tens of thousands of hours. It's being ingested, analyzed, and results are being displayed here. Kind of just this web app is more for here we see a new file come in from this coffee farm, and in due course it'll be analyzed, and we'll see the results here. But this is more for sort of operational management of deployment. You can also configure devices through this portal, but probably most interestingly, for at least those scientists amongst the audience, is this export functionality. So here you can export your detections from whichever machine learning models you dragged and dropped into your system, and then you get a whole CSV of tens of thousands of detections, which you can then also link to the audio files and verify and move on to downstream analyses. So why is this interesting? Well, it kind of completely changes the scale at which someone who is not familiar with high performance computing, is not familiar with dealing with hundreds of gigabytes of data or server analyses can deploy these devices and these technologies and get real-time audio inference. Because, you know, the next step from this is simple just sort of plotting and verifying, which can all be done on anyone's sort of home laptop. So I'll move back to this. The Bug web app is not open source as of yet, and we're still exploring models in which we can open that up. But the hardware is very much fully open source and ready to be explored. So where have we been deploying Bug? I just showed an example of some ad hoc deployments. There was about 10 or so devices in Taiwan. This is in the Alishan Mountains. So here, this is a device on a coffee farm with some neighboring forest that we also paired devices in. There were devices deployed in Mexico in similar settings. So here, what you're seeing is a shade coffee plantation. So there's a coffee tree right next to the solar panel, but it's within some existing forest of the region in Chiapas. And so this has been in collaboration with Marius Somve, pictured here at UCL, who's investigating how interspecific competition between birds varies with land use change in these tropical regions, which are so vital for these species survival. We've also deployed larger networks beyond ad hoc, and sort of that was just one example of a project, but there are other small examples of ad hoc deployments of the sensors in more recent times. But we deployed larger networks, and this is really what the technology was built for, right? It was built for autonomous large-scale deployments which collect data over years, and et cetera, that we can't do or can't easily or cost-effectively do with existing semi-autonomous recording hardware. So the first example of this was the Safe Acoustics network in Malaysian Borneo. So here it's the tropical forest fragmentation site. So you have areas of virgin rainforest, areas of log forest, areas of salvage log forest, and areas of oil palm. And we're looking at how biodiversity changes across this gradient of habitat degradation in this tropical landscape. We then went one step larger and we deployed a network of, it said 30 here, we ended up with about 40 or so more, 40 in total sites across the whole latitudinal extent of Norway. So this is the Sound of Norway project. And here what we're looking at is we had sensors right from the southern coast of Norway. So on Kristiansand, which is the southernmost tip of Norway, right up to Finnmark, which is kind of above Sweden on the northern side, deep inside the Arctic Circle. And we were interested here in monitoring bird phenology across these enormous latitudinal extents. Now, of course, using semi-autonomous recording devices, if you were deploying a network over the kind of timescale which we did, which was deployed around March and picked up around October, you would need to have at the very least monthly and probably more often trips to each one of your monitoring sites to go and replace data and batteries, retrieve data and replace batteries, sorry. But here we were able to just deploy devices once and then pick them up a lot later, and we had this vast treasure trove of data. And so Avery Bick, who's pictured here, is a PhD student in Norway who's sort of weeks away from having a preprint on some really cool results that we've got from the bird phenology modeling, monitoring, and sort of picking up on exact arrival dates of species at different latitudes and how the speed of migration and the time of the migration in relation to environmental factors such as NDVI changed. So it's this really, really large-scale, high-throughput way of monitoring bird phenology for which there really aren't existing methods right now. The next scale up from this is the TABMON project. So this is a Biodiversa Plus funded project from the EU. And so here we're looking at replicating in part the work that we did in Norway, but actually extending from Norway down through, I know we've got a very international audience who might not all be so European geography versed. I'm certainly not well versed in South American geography, for example. So you can see within the O that there's Norway, Netherlands, France, and Spain. But in short, you're going from almost the southern tip of Europe to the northern tip of Europe. And we can see phenology over far wider scales with the same systematic data collection and data analysis pipeline. And we'll be also innovating in the sort of machine learning front there as part of that project to tie analyses together across countries and biomes. Okay, so good, great. We can get nice fancy flash hardware, but they're expensive, as are solar panels, you know, SIM cards. These things all add up, and it's unlikely that you're going to kit out a deployment for less than, you know, £1,000 when we're talking about these long-term stations of monitoring. Is there a way to make the technology more accessible? And actually, we wrote a little comment piece of this in Nature about how emerging technologies, whilst, you know, I'm an engineer and I love them and it's super exciting, it's creating a new digital data divide in ecology. There are these technologies might mean that if you've got a good budget, you can do excellent monitoring, but really it's not accessible right now. So a future sort of theme that we're exploring in our lab, and actually we have a PhD student starting in September on, is exploring how ultra low cost and low power and low bandwidth sensors can be developed. Can we make devices that cost, you know, audio moths are brilliant pieces of kit, and they are certainly low cost in relation to the other options on the market. But even there, you're looking at near enough £100 once you've done an enclosure and the circuit board. Can we go an order of magnitude lower and make devices that cost £1 or maybe £5? How long can we make a single battery last? Like, could it be that we can deploy offline sensors which record locally with, you know, a handheld form factor which lasts as long as a watch battery does, you know, the matter of years rather than weeks or months? And how much can we compress data and models to fit onto these very low cost, low power devices? And I think this is a very exciting sort of way forward for the field to explore. And I mean, just an indication, you might say, well, this is just a crazy wish list, but almost everyone sitting here has a smartphone in their pocket, probably, which runs voice detection, keyword detection on microwatts or milliwatts of power. So keyword detection, real-time audio edge detection at very low power and cost budgets has been achieved in other fields. It's just a case of translating them over for environmental monitoring. So we're partnering with Emmanuel de Fork's lab in Ames, African Institute of Mathematical Sciences in South Africa, to sort of explore this theme. And Emmanuel's real expertise is in the efficient machine learning side. And then also, whenever I talk about this stuff, I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite like environmental tech projects I've seen. And this was Al Davies at the ZSL, the Zoological Society of London, who developed a plant-powered camera. So this, they basically used microbial plant fuel cells, which, don't ask me the details, used chemistry to turn plant growth into electrical energy that could be harvested into a capacitor and then eventually discharged it to trigger a camera to take a picture. So the whole like buzzline in the news was world's first plant-powered selfie. They used it to take a picture of the plant that was powering it. But it was a really neat idea about how we can do ultra low power sensing, which even and kind of ties into energy harvesting kind of at these kind of levels of power consumption. Okay, so we have very low power, low cost sensors, but still we have to manually deploy and retrieve them. We have to go and put them out, and even if it's a year later, we have to come and pick them back up. So that limits the scale of data collection, and here I almost mean scale, meaning the extent and the reach, as well as the resolution and the normal way to think about scale in the field. Biodegradable sensors are the stuff of sci-fi writers, but actually do exist. In 2012, there was this landmark paper in Science where Huang et al. Demonstrated what you see here is a fully functional electronic circuit with an inductor, a capacitor, and a resistor, which when it's manufactured and when it's deployed, it performs a function, and then after 5 minutes and 10 minutes, it biodegrades into completely harmless byproducts to both animals and humans and sort of the environment. And so these kinds of sensors have been deployed and developed primarily for medical applications. So you're thinking about implanted arterial blood pressure monitors for very fine scale measurements of variation inside the body. But the point here is you operate once, you implant the sensor, you get your data, and then you don't have to operate twice to retrieve it. But these technologies could actually be transformative for autonomous ecological monitoring too. So in 2022, we published a piece in Nature, Ecology and Evolution, which explored how these biodegradable sensors could be used in environmental monitoring. So the kind of system we dreamed up here was that you had an autonomous robotic platform which flies over or within the ecosystem of interest. It deploys sensors aerially into the area that you want to monitor, and it can therefore reach places that human couldn't otherwise reach, by cutting a trail in a thick forest. The drone can then perch nearby, or the sensors can be read out wirelessly by a receiver that's maybe a kilometer away. And then once the sensors are done with the monitoring, they biodegrade, and there's no need to come back and pick it up. And the real thing to notice here is that, well, why can we do autonomous deployments but not retrieval? And it's just when you start to think of the details of autonomous sensor deployment, you can throw something into a forest, but autonomous sensor retrieval, you have to go and find it. There might be a leaf that's fallen on top of it. It might have dislodged. So really, autonomous sensor deployment is very easy, or relatively easy, sorry, I should say. But autonomous sensor retrieval is extremely difficult to the point of being really a non-goer in most natural environments. So using biodegradable sensors, I think, is a very exciting way to get around this fundamental challenge. And so there's a couple of people working on this. Top left is showing Millie Ostiich, who's in my lab at Imperial, and she's a PhD student who's developing an autonomous robotic platform with sensors on board to do this kind of intermittent locomotion and data collection. And then below is Javad, who's based in the lab of a collaborator of mine, Clementine Boutry in TU Delft, who's developing these biodegradable microphone devices. And it's all at very early stages, but there's really promising results we're getting. So, you know, I wouldn't. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so this is kind of a very exciting approach and sort of direction we see for the field. Okay, so we talked a lot about data collection and how you can scale up data collection and a couple of thoughts on that. Let's now talk about when you've got all of this data, how do you make sense of it? And I'm going to particularly focus on soundscapes here, though afterwards I'm more than willing to chat about sound event detection, vocalization detection kind of approaches too. So there's two basic approaches to analyzing ecoacoustic data. There's the one that is, you know, BirdNet, species ID. Is there a vocalization or a passive acoustic signal that has been detected relating to this species in this audio file, yes or no? And it gives you very ecologically relevant outputs. If you want to build a spatial distribution model, if you want to look at community turnover, there's like reams of ecological literature of how to work with species community occurrence data and turn that into reliable insight at the ecosystem level. However, it is difficult to build these models, and BirdNet, again, a brilliant tool. I've used it a lot in our research, but it's not perfect, and I'm sure no one would pretend it's not, and there are biases with training data sets and everything. So soundscape approaches are kind of the other side of this, and we can just measure parameters of the soundscape as a whole. For example, average volume, activity at different frequency bands, and we can compare these, assuming that they relate to ecologically interesting parameters of the sites that we're monitoring. And so soundscape indices, you know, ACI, ADI all exist, and these are very easy to deploy at scale, but there's increasing amounts of literature showing that they're unreliable across studies, and actually we'll get into one of those papers in a bit. So how do we gain biodiversity insight from recording natural soundscapes? And here we're going to talk about the novel approach of using learned acoustic features. So I say it's novel, it's actually getting a little bit long in the tooth, so I'll go quickly over it since it's becoming more and more established recently. But the idea is that you can use a convolutional neural network to get machine learning embeddings of the soundscape, and you can use these learned features in place of the soundscape indices or the handcrafted features to monitor your soundscapes. So how do you go about doing this in practice? Well, you need to label a bunch of audio data, train the CNN to classify audio, and then use the embedding from a trained CNN. The technical details are kind of unimportant, but the idea here is that the features are learned from the data set itself rather than being handcrafted by anyone saying perhaps 10 kilohertz is an interesting frequency range. The features are highly descriptive, they're derived from real data, and in theory, they're robust to noise if the labels in the audio data set are of sufficient diversity. And what's quite nice is it's already been done by Google's audio set project, so there's VG-ish features. But actually, more recently, there are many other alternatives that are perhaps more up to date. So there's the YAMNet project from Google, which is a similar idea, a general purpose audio classification neural network, which provides a very robust, very highly descriptive feature set. BirdNet has also been used as a feature extractor and with very promising results by Buraj and Tom Denton. And so VGG-ish is just one example, but the idea of using a convolutional neural network or a machine learning model to learn features is really the like shift in mindset from existing approaches. So we found that these features capture spatial patterns.
No, ahora me metí a una charla que todo
What
así,
we're
nada.
looking at here is 6 or 7 different data sets of audio of passively recorded ecosystem soundscapes. And actually a couple of them from down, probably there are people sat right next to Sapsucker Woods, and both the USA data sets are from Sapsucker Woods. And what we see is there's a bit of clustering in terms of temperate soundscapes are clustering similarly to tropical soundscapes. And what we shown below here is we trained and tested cross-validation a like classification model based on these soundscape features to predict data set from audio. So it's a bit of a false task, but it's asking how much descriptive power is there being soundscape indices by quite some way. We then asked the same question within one landscape. So here we're looking at the SAFE project, which I described earlier with the tropical forest fragmentation. And we see that we can predict above ground biomass, which is a proxy for forest quality in this region, very well with audio. Once again, a bit of a false question. Why would you not just detect above ground biomass? But the point here is we know that species communities and biodiversity vary on this axis more than anything else in this landscape. And we can separate this axis with the acoustic features, with the exception of recorders that were by a river where the signal's completely washed out. So that's an interesting consideration. We can see temporal patterns as well within our data set. So this is one of those perhaps like a wood data sets from that fixed microphone that's outside the Cornell Lab of Ornithology that was going for 3 or 4 years. And in red here, we see December, November, winter months. And then in blues, we go over to August, July, and summer months. So we see seasonal cycling of the soundscape. These are all unsupervised projections of the data, and then we've just put the labels on afterwards. And what we're kind of saying here is we know that ecologically, the primary driver at these timescales of community change is over the yearly timescale, and we're seeing this naturally come out in soundscape data. And then similarly at diurnal scales, I won't labor the point, but day and night separate, and this happened across all the different data sets that we tried. Okay, the soundscape features are excellent for predicting community type patterns of biodiversity across spatial and temporal patterns, and they're better than soundscape indices, great. But there's kind of a bonus, which is this kind of feature embedding approach. Because the features are so powerful, they allow us to detect anomalies in an unsupervised way. So here what we did was we took 5 days of audio data and we calculated the CNN embedding for every single 1 second of that data. We then fit a density estimation model, so a Gaussian mixture model here, depicted in blue, to the data to find the most dense areas of soundscape feature space. So the centers of these blue dots will be very common sounds. For example, a dawn chorus that just repeats again and again, or like the wind, or just common different sounds of the area being monitored. But when we look at the red stars, those are samples from our 5 days of data that were extremely improbable. They were like the outliers, the unexpected sounds. And we hypothesized actually that these would allow us, looking at these would be anomalous sounds. So here in this middle panel, what you're seeing is we had a chainsaw sound, 3 different chainsaw sounds that we performed playback experiments of at different distances from a recorder. And in black, what you see is the anomaly score for this anomaly detection regime that we devised. And you can see the anomaly score peaks for each of the chainsaw sounds, and the effect is sort of less severe when the playback is performed further away. So what we're doing here is we're detecting these are anomalous, improbable sounds, but we're not ever telling the model what a chainsaw is, that a chainsaw is important, but it's just to say that we can detect unexpected sounds without any model. And we tried this for many different indicators of illegal activity in the sites that we're monitoring. So here are results from the tropical forest experiment in Sabah in Borneo. And we showed that we could detect chainsaws, gunshots, chopping, these kind of typical sounds that come along with illegal activity without even knowing that that's what we were looking for. They were just unsupervised detected as anomalies. Now, you know, the actually deploying such a system should come with a thousand other considerations about ethics and, you know, all the things around that. But the point is that we were showing here that embedding your audio in a very descriptive feature space gives you extra bonuses in a way that you can't do when you simply just look at volume, because it's not a descriptive enough axis or ACI or ADI. Okay, so we now go on to ask, can soundscapes be used as a habitat suitability indicator for certain species? So previously we were detecting, predicting, monitoring at the community level, at the ecosystem level. But now let's look at certain species, target species. Can we predict whether a habitat is suitable for it or not based on soundscape? okay, why would you not just use vocalization detection? Great question, you know. Well, not all species vocalize, so we might want to know about probability of occurrence of species in areas which are non-vocal. Does soundscape data give us any insight into this? This is one question. There's a lack of training data for important species. So I said earlier about species classification models having biases, and time and again it's been shown that they're biased towards the very common, but perhaps on the whole less threatened species. So we might not have ready-made solutions for all the species we want. And finally, annotation is laborious. So if you wanted to then create new species vocalization detection classifiers, it's a long and arduous process. So what we did here is we used an existing data set of soundscape recordings at the 20-minute, sorry, I'll hold that. Soundscape recordings at the 20-minute scale, which had associated point counts, but not point counts saying exactly at what time each species was found. So you've got a soundscape, you've got 20 minutes, and you've got a species community that was detected. And then what we did was we built a PDF, a probability density function of the soundscape features where the species was present. So we pulled all the 20-minute files where the species was, where a given species was present. And then we did the same for all the soundscape features where the species was absent. And we built two PDFs, and then we looked at the log likelihood ratio between these two. So probably not worth getting into the technical details, but this is the way that we did it. We aggregated data at 20-minute levels, and then we classified probability of occurrence based on the times that the soundscapes where the species was present and soundscapes where the species was absent. What we found was that actually this method was very predictive for a wide range of species. So in these plots, you see on the x-axis there's hour of day, so 0 to 24. And on the sites, there's old growth at the bottom, logged forest, oil palm, selectively logged, and oil palm. So these sites are saying they're in tropical forest degradation gradient from the highest quality forest at the bottom to the lowest quality on agricultural sites at the top. And we're saying in red, what you see is the true occurrence from the on-the-ground observers of the species. That I found a yellow-vented bulbul at 7 AM in this oil palm site, red. And then the different sizes are because there were repeat surveys done. And in blue, what we see are the predicted occurrences or probabilities of occurrences from the soundscape approach that we devised. And you can see that using soundscapes as habitat quality suitability indicator gave us very good predictive capacity as to where we could expect the species to be. So this worked for both diurnal species, such as the yellow-vented bulbul, which were found most commonly in poorer quality habitat, the sooty-capped babbler, which vocalized and was found almost exclusively in dawn chorus, but almost across all habitats, and then the treehole frog, which was a nocturnal species and was found across most habitats. And we could predict where we might find these species from ground surveys just from the soundscape data, but without ever knowing what these species sounded like. You might say, well, there are other ways of detecting habitat suitability, and perhaps acoustics is not the best suited. So what we show here is the species classification AUC for every single different species in our data set, which were herbivorous and apivorous species, using ACD, which is above ground carbon density from from airborne LiDAR scans. So airborne, not satellite-borne, crucially, very high quality LiDAR scans of our forest. And then on the right-hand side, we looked at the soundscape model. So what we see is that the AUCs, the accuracies of the predictions, were far higher, or like for many of the species, using the soundscape model than from the ACD model. So understanding soundscapes can give us extra insight into habitat suitability for species that we don't currently get from existing sensing modalities, which are primarily performed above the canopy. Okay, so we've looked at the ecosystem level, we've looked at the species level. Now, I guess the question is, do any of these methods generalize across ecosystems? Like, can we pick up a model that was trained on soundscapes in site A and take it to site B and use it to predict the same thing? So here, the study was based on 4 point count acoustic data sets. So in each case, there was, as you see in the bottom here, there was someone performing a point count with probably some binoculars at the same time as audio recording was happening with a microphone. And these recordings and point counts span from 5 to 20 minutes, but that 20 minutes is the longest. So there's 6,700 point counts which were performed in South Africa Woods, about 1,000 point counts that were performed in Malaysia, and very varied sites at which these were performed. So 4 different data sets, and this is going to help us pose the question of, does soundscape predictions from one place move to another place? Can we train a model in one area and extrapolate? So here what we did was we looked at learned features, so LS here in blue, and soundscape indices, SSIs in green, and we looked at univariate correlations of each of those features, so 128 learned features and 60-odd soundscape indices, with avian richness in each of these data sets. And what we look at here are the distributions of correlations, Pearson's correlations, of these univariate features with species richness, and dotted lines indicate significance thresholds for each data set. So what we see is that lots of features correlate with avian richness. You see all of these bars that are in blue outside here for India, or in the orange outside these dotted lines for Malaysia. These are all significant positive or negative correlations of univariate features with avian richness, but also lots similarly don't. There's lots within the dotted lines which show no correlations. So looking at the same analysis but visualized a different way, what we said was, per feature, how many data sets did it correlate with species richness in a significant manner? And what we see is that most features correlated with avian richness in 1 or 2 data sets. Whether you're using learned features or soundscape indices, the story is the same. And very few correlated with soundscape richness in 3 data sets, and none of the soundscape indices correlated with avian richness in all 4 data sets we looked at, and only very few of them, the learned features, did. And if we zoom in a bit more to look at those that performed the best, you know, the few features that correlated with soundscape richness across 4 data sets. So the learned feature 14 was a good one, for example. And here on the y-axis, you see the value of this acoustic feature, and on the x-axis, you see the value of avian richness. And you can see, whilst there are significant correlations with p-values in the kind of ranges that you like to see, the spread is enormous. So actually, if we're using this as a monitoring tool, you have to envision that you don't have access to this x-axis, and you're just looking at a learned feature value, and you're trying to infer avian richness. So whilst there are significant correlations, I'd argue the spread is enormous. And if we look at this USA one here, for almost any learned feature value, you have almost any observed avian richness value. So the predictive capacity of these methods is pretty poor in reality. And the same goes for spectrogram cover, which happened to be one of the best soundscape indices. The spread across lines, even where there are like strongly significant results, you know, less than 0.01, is so large as to make the predictive capacity of these things when deployed very, very limited. So you might say univariate's a bit outdated. We're using machine learning models. Let's do multivariate models. So here what we did was we looked at how machine learning models trained on the learned features, so all 128 features could predict species richness in the different data sets. And so down the diagonal, we see within data set, obviously with train test split, but we see that if we train on some data from India and then test on some other data from India, we can predict species richness with some coefficient of determination, R², that is decent and positive. Same in Malaysia, same in Taiwan, same with the USA. But if we train a model on any one of these locations and evaluate it elsewhere, then our predictive capacity is, our coefficient of determination is less than 0, which means that your predictions are worth a chance, or as good as chance. So does this mean that soundscapes are a dead end? Because essentially what this says is, if I want to predict predict avian richness from soundscapes in any data set, I have to collect a massive amount of on-the-ground calibration data, which corresponds soundscapes to species communities. Well, there is something you can do without ground truth data. And so, wait, the first answer to this is no, it's not a dead end, because with ground truth data, you can predict quite a lot. But another thing is, without even ground truth data, there's some indication that soundscape change correlates with community change. So here what we're looking at is pairwise distances between soundscapes, between the soundscape features of audio files, and pairwise distances between the species communities of the corresponding communities recording those audio files on the y-axis. So if file A to file B has a soundscape distance of 2 in whichever metricless manner this means, then you can read up there and you can say, well, the species community distance will be around 0.8. There will be that much Jacquard species community distance between your two observations. And these correlations are all positive and repeatable. So we're saying across all data sets, if you look at soundscape distance, it tells you something about species community distance, but crucially, it doesn't tell you anything about whether the species community is increased in diversity or decreased in diversity. It just shows you that the species community is different. And also the same point applies earlier, which is the spread of these points is enormous. And if we look at the Malaysia and the USA examples, just to pick two random ones, many occasions where the soundscape distance is very, very small, around about 0, but the species community turnover is almost complete, up to 1. So just monitoring soundscape change isn't going to always tell you about species community change, but it could tell you something that you get for free, so to speak, without having to collect any ground truth data from your study site. But that's probably about as far as you can go. And then there's a separate angle, and this is Arpit Om Prakash, who's a PhD student I'm co-supervising at IISc in India, the Indian Institute of Sciences. And he's looking at interpretable soundscape models. So here, what's kind of depicted is a very early result he had, which is showing that if you fit probability density functions and Gaussian mixture models in particular to soundscape models from different types of landscape. So in grey, you've got agriculture, red reference, which is like forest, and disturbed, which is somewhere in between. You can start to pick out areas of soundscape which are unique to specific types of landscapes. So here you see this grey circle was soundscapes that were only found in his agricultural sites, but not in the reference or disturbed. And then you see in red, these were soundscapes that were only found in his reference high quality sites, but not in any of his others. And so it's starting to unpack, can we actually make soundscape prediction models which still perform the final step of predicting habitat quality or whatever, but actually are interpretable, and we can go and dig in, and then we can ask, what does this agriculture sound like? What is unique about it? What is unique about these reference sounds that are not found in the other areas? So why would you do that? Well, you get honest models with a bit of interpretability. So you get models which are able to say anything within this blue region were soundscapes that were found in the reference agriculture and disturbed sites. So to make a prediction about where they were from is meaningless. And existing models and existing approaches can't give you this uncertainty estimation. And they can't also say there's not enough data, as in we are exploring an area of feature space that is not part of your training data set. Also, I think this is really where I personally believe the huge power of the soundscape approaches is in data exploration. So there are vast amounts of data being collected by monitoring networks deployed around the world. And there's very little way of organizing them beyond just running structure classifiers on. But with interpretable soundscape models, you can start to get efficient summaries of enormous data sets. You can pick out anomalies in the way as shown earlier. But also you can start to do data exploration in a way of habitat classification. So in this, I mean, you can start to define keystone sounds. If I collect enough data from agriculture, enough data from disturbed, and enough data from reference in one landscape, I can very quickly, with these unsupervised and interpretable soundscape models, understand what are the keystone sounds that we only find in reference and that we're losing in these other areas. And there's no other way really with supervised classification models where you can ask these questions about what are the keystone sounds, what are the key things that differentiate the soundscape from this area from that area, or these sets of areas from these sets of areas. And with that, I'd just like to thank you for your time. That's about it. All I've got prepared, and the timing's kind of all right. All the collaborators who are involved in all the many projects that were presented here, field staff and funders. And yeah, thanks. Any questions? Maybe if we've got a few minutes, Dina will be able to say.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. Yeah, and does anybody have any questions? You can unmute or put it in the chat. I see one in the chat. Do you have a device for real-time monitoring of underwater sounds?
No, so currently not. The bug devices are what I'd encourage you to do is to sign up to the mailing list on the bug.xyz chat website, and hopefully within the next year, it's kind of slow timescales, I know, but we're looking to release more widely. And the next release of our device, we do have a channel for external microphones. So you would be able to plug in a hydrophone that is dropped into the water and then have it go through the same remote monitoring pipeline. But we don't have any device that is submergible currently.
We have a couple more in the chat. When you export the detections, do you get I think the sound clips of those detections as well?
Yeah, so in our current implementation, what you get is a CSV file, which you can open in Excel, that is detections, all the parameters to do with where it was found, what time it was found, and then also a link to the clip of the detection. I should say for the web app, it's kind of, we're closer to having the hardware available for broad scale release than we are for the web app in the back end. So I'm certainly interested to talk to people, especially if they have planned deployments in, sort of 20, 50, 100 devices. But otherwise, the open source code and everything for the web app, it will probably be a little bit behind the rest of the technology that I've shown. Yeah. So I continue just reading some of the questions from the. Yeah. Okay. So I see when you export the detections, you get. Oh no, that was the last one. Do real-time devices beam out raw detections, raw audio just detection? So there's not any edge detection done on our bug devices. There is a lot of work being done. I've seen the BirdNet Pi project, but also at UCL, the people in Nature Lab there, Kate Jones, are working on embedded AI. I'm certainly interested in embedded AI, but I think we're looking more in the microcontroller realm. So these are highly compressed models which are running at order of magnitude less computational complexity than you would do on a Raspberry Pi. Dina, should I just carry on reading out?
Sure, I can read for you if that's easier. So the next one, when you're doing your feature extraction, are you using the raw audio files or are you using spectrograms? And did you use special feature extraction packages or create your own?
So for the soundscape indices, we use the scikit-mad library to extract as many soundscape indices as we could. And for the machine learning features, we use the VGG network from Google, which is all open source and on GitHub. If you actually look at the PNAS paper, we wrote some wrapper code around the VGG network for sort of easily computing the learned features. So that's all available on GitHub as well. So yeah, in short, we didn't write any of our own feature extraction packages. We used openly available tools and we wrapped them where we saw appropriate.
All right, wonderful talk. Where did it go? This type of research could propel terrestrial bioacoustics towards operationalizing much larger scales of data collection. How does your team handle the accompanying challenge of long-term data storage and archiving?
Yeah, good question. I'd say currently, well, my first comment always with this kind of comment is that this kind of question is that we are dealing with large amounts of data for sure. We're talking about tens of terabytes, maybe hundreds of terabytes, but these are not vast amounts of data in terms of what is possible on cloud computing platforms or even home hosted servers at these days. So we're dealing with it with just archiving long-term on university servers. And, to ask for 10 terabytes of storage is not the end of the world, but I appreciate that's not an option for everyone. I'm very keen to and very happy to see there are pushes across the world in France and the UK for natural history museums to take up a role of long-term archival of ecological data stores. There's nothing that I see that is like really a perfect solution, and again, in Australia, I see with the A2O, they're pushing towards the Australian Acoustic Observatory. They're finding unified stores of this large data. Yeah, I don't know what the best solution is, but I know people are working on it, and we don't have something that is like generalizable and open, and that we could promise is being hosted for 100 years, which is really what's needed for the field.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it's a challenge I think a lot of us face is what to do with all the data. All right, so we have another one. When you did pairwise comparisons of soundscapes from different sites, you used averaged embeddings over multiple time windows for each site. Do you think that you're losing a lot of the potential differences between sites in doing that averaging step?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally fair comment. I think a lot of the work that Upins is doing now with those interpretable soundscape models and building PDFs and actually comparing distributions of features between areas is looking to undo that averaging step or looking to go beyond that. So certainly I think that the averaging was kind of the best thing we thought about at that time, but there's a huge amount of work that could be done, which is, I think we need to get more into the mindset of comparing distributions and comparing feature sets like multiple observations of features rather than just comparing averages. Yeah.
Great, and the next one is about denoising. So while pre-processing your data sets, do you apply the denoising functions? And if so, can you chat about how you did it?
No, we in short didn't. And I think this is kind of where these machine learning features really come into their own. Because if you look at the training data sets of these general purpose large scale audio classification networks, or even if you look at the training data sets of BirdNet, you will have willow warbler call on 1,000 different backgrounds from 1,000 different recording sites, and actually just telling the network that those all map to willow warbler means that the model is performing the denoising inherently within itself. So no, we don't perform any extra denoising, although I would say there's very early indications from of all sources, an undergraduate project where we're finding that applying some form of denoising is changing our BirdNet outputs, not necessarily increasing or decreasing results, but changing them. So I would be careful about denoising. Yeah.
We have maybe just one or two more, so as we're over time a little bit. So a question about analyzing urban forest soundscapes that are full of urban noises.
I mean, the device can work well to do anything in the audible range, but as for like, I haven't done any work in this area, like City of Delhi. Yeah, certainly one of the most most varied urban soundscapes. Yeah, I guess the device does audible stuff, but the interesting question of what the advances are in the world of urban ecoacoustics is completely different. Yeah, I don't really know much of that though.
All right, maybe we'll take one more. So when pre-processing your data set from Xenocanto, the bird is only present in a small part of the audio file. How do you deal with the part that doesn't contain bird? So how do you remove the noise or the silent part?
This is that what you're talking about here is sound event detection, and that's kind of a whole separate challenge to what's been presented in this talk. So yeah, I guess there's many strategies, but it's kind of not something I've got hands on with.
Okay.
Sorry, just to clarify, all of the results presented here were soundscape in the AI side. So we were analyzing everything, including silence, but there was no Xenocanto data presented.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for joining, and thank you so much, Sarab, for your really engaging talk. I have all sorts of inspiring ideas to go do new things with my data too. So really, really well presented and clear and really exciting stuff. So thank you so much.
More than welcome. Thank you for inviting me. And thanks everyone for attending. Yeah. Thanks.